My name is Isabella Reed. I was 32 years old when my parents looked me in the eye and calmly told me I wasn't invited to Christmas anymore. They expected me to spend the holiday alone, quietly accepting what they'd been doing to me for years. They never imagined that one invitation from me would gather the entire family under one roof and reveal a secret they'd spent decades making sure never came out. If you've ever been treated like the outsider in your own family, this story is for you. Leave a like, subscribe if you enjoy true revenge stories, and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Families rarely explode all at once. Most of them crack. Tiny fractures. Hairline breaks that nobody else notices because everyone keeps smiling in family photos. Looking back now, I can pinpoint hundreds of moments where I should have realized I wasn't truly one of them anymore. Maybe I never had been. Growing up, there was always an invisible ranking in our house. My older brother Ethan sat comfortably at the top. I occupied whatever space remained. If Ethan forgot Mother's Day, Mom would laugh and say, "Oh, that's just Ethan." If I forgot to call by noon, honestly, Isabella, sometimes I wonder where I went wrong raising you. Same mistake, completely different reaction. At first, I believed it was because Ethan was older, then because he was busy, then because he had children. There was always another excuse. Every year, the goalposts moved. Every year, I chased them. Christmas had always been the worst. Mom loved Christmas. Not because she loved family, because she loved appearances. Every ornament had to match. Every napkin had to fold perfectly. Every present arranged beneath the tree according to height and wrapping paper. She treated Christmas dinner like a performance, and everyone had assigned roles. Dad carved the turkey. Ethan told funny stories. His wife, Lauren, brought homemade pies everyone praised for 20 straight minutes. The grandchildren opened presents first while everyone filmed. And me? I set the table, washed dishes, cleaned afterward. I was the dependable daughter. Useful. Invisible. If I disappeared halfway through dinner, I'm honestly not sure anyone would have noticed. When I was 26, I brought my boyfriend Daniel. Mom spent the entire evening introducing him as Ethan's brother-in-law. Not my boyfriend. Not once. Daniel corrected her twice. Eventually, he gave up. On the drive home, he squeezed the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Does she even hear herself? What do you mean? Your mother barely knows who you are. I defended her. I always defended her. She's just stressed. Looking back, that sentence probably lasted 10 years too long. Daniel and I broke up 2 years later, not because of my family, not entirely, but he once admitted something that haunted me. It always felt like you were trying to earn love that should have been automatic. At the time, I thought he didn't understand. Now I know he understood before I did. After the breakup, I threw myself into work. I became an event planner, corporate galas, fundraisers, holiday parties. Ironically, I became incredibly good at creating joyful gatherings for complete strangers. Meanwhile, every holiday with my own family felt colder. The calls became shorter, the invitations less frequent. Sometimes I'd learn about family dinners through Facebook, pictures, everyone smiling. Caption: so thankful we could all get together. All. Apparently, not all. When I asked Mom why nobody told me, "Oh, sweetheart, it was last minute." Except everyone else somehow knew. Dad never intervened. He specialized in silence. Silence was his native language. Whenever Mom excluded me, he'd avoid eye contact. Not agreeing. Not disagreeing. Simply disappearing into the wallpaper. Sometimes I think that hurt worse. Then Ethan's children got older. Everything revolved around them. Every conversation, every holiday, every family decision. I loved my niece and nephew. None of this was their fault. But slowly, I stopped existing outside of being Aunt Bella, not Isabella, not daughter, not sister, just an accessory. Last Thanksgiving should have been my warning. Mom accidentally made 2 seating charts. She'd forgotten I was coming. There literally wasn't a chair for me. She laughed. Oh goodness, silly me. Dad gave me his seat. Not because he wanted to, because there wasn't another option. The entire dinner felt like everyone was pretending that hadn't happened. I drove home crying so hard I had to pull onto the shoulder twice. Still, I convinced myself Christmas would be different. Christmas always deserves one more chance, doesn't it? December arrived. Snow-dusted rooftops. Every coffee shop smelled like cinnamon. Downtown filled with lights. My apartment glowed with warm white decorations. I bought gifts for everyone. Expensive gifts, thoughtful gifts. Mom's favorite perfume, Dad's leather journal, Lauren's stand mixer attachment she'd mentioned once in passing, the kids' gaming consoles. I spent nearly $2,000. Not because I could easily afford it, because I wanted one perfect Christmas. Maybe this year they'd see me, really see me. 3 days before Christmas Eve, Mom called. Not unusual. She almost never called. Immediately I smiled. Maybe she wanted to coordinate dinner. Maybe she needed help decorating. Maybe... Hello? Isabella? No warmth, no greeting. Just my name. We've had to make a difficult decision. Every muscle in my shoulders tightened. What happened? It's probably best if you don't come this year. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because I genuinely believed she was joking. What? There just isn't enough room. I looked around my apartment. Room. They'd hosted 22 people before. I don't understand. Ethan's in-laws are joining us. So, we're already over capacity. I waited. Surely she'd say she'd figured something out. She didn't. Instead, silence. Then, I know you'll understand. Understand? Understand what? That I'd been replaced? That strangers mattered more than their own daughter? I swallowed hard. So, I'm just... not invited? It isn't personal. Not personal. My own mother had somehow found a way to make excluding her daughter sound like a scheduling conflict. I whispered, "Okay." She sounded relieved. "Oh, good. I knew you'd be mature about it." Click. She hung up. I stood frozen in my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone laughed walking past my building. My tea went cold beside me. I couldn't move. Eventually, I slid down the cabinet onto the floor and cried harder than I had since my divorce. Not because of Christmas, because something inside me finally admitted the truth. They weren't accidentally forgetting me. They were choosing not to include me. Again. And this time, they didn't even bother pretending otherwise. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Lauren. Mary, almost Christmas. Sorry you couldn't make it. Maybe next year. Maybe next year. As if I'd declined. As if I'd had a choice. Then my cousin Megan texted. Can't wait to see you Christmas Eve. I stared, confused. What do you mean? At your parents' house? I'm not invited. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Finally. What? I read that message 15 times. Because if Megan thought I was coming, maybe nobody knew. Maybe Mom had lied. Maybe... Then another message. I thought you were hosting brunch Christmas morning. Hosting? I frowned. What are you talking about? Long pause. Then... Oh. No explanation. Just... Oh. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't adding up, and for the first time, instead of crying, I started asking questions. Because people only get nervous when they're trying not to reveal something. And suddenly, my entire family seemed nervous. I had no idea that before Christmas arrived, I'd uncover a secret that would explain 30 years of being treated like I never truly belonged. I barely slept that night, not because I was crying anymore, because something didn't make sense. I kept replaying every message I'd received. Mom had told me there wasn't enough room. Lauren had acted as though I'd simply decided not to come. Megan thought I was hosting Christmas brunch. 3 different versions of the same story. Somebody wasn't telling the truth. The question was, who? By 6 the next morning, I had already made coffee that had gone cold twice. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hands, staring out the window while flakes of snow drifted lazily between the apartment buildings. Normally, Christmas week filled me with excitement. Now everything felt strangely quiet, almost suspended, like the world knew something I didn't. I opened the family group chat. Hundreds of messages, photos of wrapped presents, recipes, discussions about what time everyone should arrive. Nobody had mentioned that I wasn't coming. Nobody had even hinted that there had been some last-minute change. It was as though I simply didn't exist. I scrolled farther back, then farther. I noticed something odd. Every time plans had been finalized over the last few months, someone had written, "Everyone's good with that?" Every single person replied, except me. Not because I hadn't answered, because I hadn't been included. I wasn't muted. I wasn't busy. I simply hadn't been added to the conversations where decisions were made. I felt my stomach tighten. Maybe it had always been like this. Maybe I had just never noticed. Around noon, Megan called. "I've been thinking about your text all morning." "So have I." "You seriously aren't invited?" "No." She went quiet, then lowered her voice. "My aunt told everyone you couldn't make it because you were spending Christmas with friends." I laughed once. A short, humorless sound. I wasn't even given the chance. I knew something felt off. "What else did she say?" Another pause. "I don't know if I should—" "Megan." She sighed. "She made it sound like you'd been pulling away from the family." The words landed harder than I expected. Pulling away? I'd been the one driving 3 hours every birthday, the one remembering anniversaries, the one who helped Dad recover after his knee surgery, the one who organized Grandma's 80th birthday. "Pulling away?" I whispered. "I've spent years trying to stay close." "I know." "No." I looked down at my hands. "I don't think anybody knows." After we hung up, I did something I'd never done before. Instead of defending my parents, I started making a list. Every forgotten birthday, every dinner I wasn't invited to, every holiday where I was treated like hired help instead of family, every excuse, every apology that never came. The list filled 3 notebook pages. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair. The evidence was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And patterns don't happen accidentally. That afternoon, my Aunt Carol called. She was Dad's younger sister. Unlike the rest of the family, she never played games. If she loved you, you knew it. If she disliked something, you definitely knew it. "I heard you're staying home." "I don't exactly have a choice." "What do you mean?" I explained the phone call. She interrupted before I finished. "Your mother said you declined." "She what?" "She said you wanted a quiet Christmas." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Aunt Carol muttered something under her breath that definitely wasn't appropriate for Christmas. I knew she was hiding something. "What do you mean?" "I don't know yet." That wasn't the answer I expected. "You think there's more?" "I've known your mother 40 years. And?" "She only lies when she's protecting something." Those words echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. Protecting something. Not someone. Something. The following morning, I drove to my parents' neighborhood. I told myself I was only dropping off presents. Nothing more. The streets looked exactly as they always had. Children building snowmen, garlands hanging from porches, the smell of fireplaces drifting through the cold air. Everything looked warm, normal. I parked half a block away. My parents' house was covered in decorations. Dad always loved hanging lights. He'd spend hours making sure every strand lined up perfectly. As I carried the gifts toward the front porch, laughter floated through an open window. There were already people inside. I hadn't realized they were entertaining guests. I set the presents beside the door. Before I could knock, I heard my mother's voice. As long as Isabella doesn't show up. Every muscle in my body froze. Someone laughed. Another voice asked, "Does she know?" Mom answered immediately, "No, and she never will." The words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the December air. Never will know what? I stepped closer without thinking. Dad spoke next. "We can't keep this going forever. We've managed 32 years. 32 years. Exactly my age." I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mom's voice became quieter. "If she finds out now, everything changes." "I know," Dad replied. "That's exactly what worries me." Footsteps approached the front hallway. Instinct took over. I hurried off the porch and ducked behind the large pine tree near the driveway just as the front door opened. Ethan stepped outside carrying a trash bag. He walked right past the gifts. He never even noticed them. As soon as he disappeared around the side of the house, I hurried back to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. I didn't start the engine for nearly 5 minutes. I just sat there, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. 32 years. Everything changes. She never will know. Whatever secret existed, it had something to do with me. When I got home, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I paced the apartment, started folding laundry, stopped halfway through, turned on the television, muted it after 30 seconds. Finally, I opened the old cedar chest my grandmother had given me when I moved into my first apartment. Inside were photo albums, birthday cards, school certificates, things I'd packed away years earlier. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Just something. Anything. An answer. One photograph caught my attention. I had seen it 100 times before, me at about 3 years old. Dad was holding me. Mom stood beside us. Grandma smiled behind us. Only this time I noticed something strange. Mom wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Grandma. And Grandma, she looked heartbroken. Not emotional. Heartbroken. As though she knew something nobody else in that picture did. I turned the photo over. Grandma always labeled the backs. Most simply said things like Christmas 1997 or Zoo Trip. This one had only 3 words written in her neat handwriting. She deserves truth. I stared at the ink until the letters blurred. Grandma had died 5 years earlier. Whatever she had wanted to tell me, she had taken it with her. Unless she'd left something behind. I suddenly remembered. After her funeral, Aunt Carol had mentioned Grandma kept journals. Boxes of them. She had written almost every day for decades. I had never asked what became of them. Now I knew exactly who I needed to call. I picked up my phone. Before I could dial, another notification appeared. It was from my mother. "Don't forget to pick up your presents after Christmas. We'll leave them on the porch." Not, "Come visit." Not, "We'll miss you." Not even, "Merry Christmas." Just instructions. As if I were a delivery driver collecting a package. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. A small one. The kind that appears when grief quietly transforms into determination. Because whatever secret my parents had spent 32 years protecting, I was done waiting for someone else to tell me. I was going to find it myself. And once I did, Christmas would never be the same again. The strangest thing about discovering that your life may have been built on a lie isn't the anger, it's the silence that follows. For 2 days, I didn't call anyone. I didn't answer texts. I let my phone vibrate across the coffee table until the battery finally died. My apartment was unusually still. Outside, children pulled sleds through fresh snow while neighbors hung wreaths and carried wrapped gifts into warm, brightly lit homes. For the first time in years, I stopped trying to fix my family. I started paying attention instead. There was a difference. For so long, every uncomfortable conversation ended with me apologizing for feelings I hadn't caused. Every slight was explained away. Every disappointment became another opportunity for me to be the bigger person. That phrase suddenly made me laugh. Being the bigger person had apparently meant making myself smaller. I wasn't interested in doing that anymore. The morning of December 23rd, I called Aunt Carol. She answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call. I need to ask you something." "I know." "You do?" "I have a feeling this isn't about Christmas anymore." "No." I looked out my kitchen window. "I think it's about my whole life." There was a long pause before she spoke. "I still have your grandmother's journals." My pulse quickened. "Can I see them?" "You can." "But they aren't going to answer everything." "I don't need everything." I swallowed. "I just need the truth to start somewhere." Aunt Carol lived 40 minutes away in a small farmhouse that somehow always smelled like cinnamon and old books. Grandma had lived with her during the last 3 years of her life. After her health began failing, boxes filled one wall of the spare bedroom. Everyone neatly labeled, everyone dated. Grandma had documented birthdays, weather, recipes, gardening notes, and apparently every family disagreement that had ever occurred. "I never read most of them," Aunt Carol admitted as she lifted one onto the bed. "They felt private." "I understand." She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "If you find something difficult, I'll call you." She nodded once and quietly left the room. For the next 3 hours, I turned page after page. Most entries were wonderfully ordinary. Descriptions of family dinners, notes about flowers blooming, comments about Dad working too hard, stories about Ethan getting into trouble as a teenager. Then, near the end of one journal, a folded envelope slipped onto the bedspread. There was no name written on it. Only one sentence in Grandma's familiar handwriting. "For the day she finally starts asking questions." My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. Inside wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an explanation. It was another clue. Truth has a habit of surviving, even when people spend years burying it. Don't begin with your mother. Begin with your father. He carries guilt much more poorly. That was all. No signature, no details, just those words. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Dad. Not Mom. Grandma wanted me to begin with Dad. On the drive home, I kept replaying every conversation I'd ever had with him. He hadn't been cruel. He hadn't mocked me. He hadn't openly rejected me. He had simply disappeared whenever Mom decided something. Maybe that wasn't weakness. Maybe it was guilt. Those weren't always the same thing. That evening, another text arrived from Mom. "Hope you're doing okay. Merry Christmas." No apology, no invitation, just enough kindness to make her look reasonable if anyone else ever saw the message. For the first time in my life, I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my contacts. Not to message family, to message everyone else, my closest friends, former coworkers, neighbors I'd grown close to over the years, my college roommate, an elderly widow named Mrs. Alvarez who lived downstairs and hadn't seen her son in almost 4 years. Without overthinking it, I typed the same message. "I know it's last minute, but if you don't already have plans, my door is open on Christmas Day. No formal dinner. No expectations. Just food, warmth, and good company. I hesitated, then pressed send. Within minutes, replies poured in. I'd love to. Really? Can I bring dessert? I'll make my grandmother's stuffing. I wasn't expecting anywhere to go this year. Each notification softened something inside me. Not because people accepted, because nobody asked what I could offer first. Nobody asked whether I deserved an invitation. They were simply happy to spend time together. I'd forgotten relationships could feel that uncomplicated. The next morning, I went shopping. The grocery store was overflowing with frantic last-minute customers. Children argued over candy canes. Holiday music played slightly too loudly through worn ceiling speakers. I pushed my cart down crowded aisles, adding far more food than one person could ever eat. Fresh bread, vegetables, roasting potatoes, ham, turkey, pies, coffee, hot chocolate, enough ingredients to feed 20 people. Halfway through checkout, I looked at the total. Then I smiled. It was almost exactly what I'd spent on presents for people who hadn't wanted me around. This felt better. Much better. Back at the apartment building, my neighbors noticed the mountain of grocery bags. Mr. Dawson from across the hall held the elevator. Expecting an army? Maybe. He laughed. Need extra chairs? I hadn't even considered chairs. I actually do. I've got 6. Mrs. Alvarez overheard from her doorway. I have 4. Someone farther down the hall called out. I've got folding tables in storage. Within 15 minutes, half the building seemed to be helping. Furniture appeared. Serving dishes, extra blankets, Christmas lights. Nobody complained. Nobody kept score. It occurred to me that these people, most of whom I barely knew a year ago, were showing me more generosity than my own family had in decades. That realization hurt. It also healed something. By Christmas Eve morning, my apartment looked completely different. The dining table had been extended. Garlands hung across the windows. Candles sat ready to be lit. The tree glowed softly in the corner. It wasn't perfect. Some ornaments didn't match. The ribbon on the wreath was crooked. One string of lights blinked randomly. It was beautiful. Because it wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply welcoming. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt excited for Christmas. Not anxious. Not exhausted. Just excited. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. Dad. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? His voice sounded hesitant. I heard you're hosting tomorrow. News traveled quickly. I am. For who? People who'd like somewhere to spend Christmas. Silence. Then. You've invited a lot of the family. I've invited everyone. Another pause. Your mother wasn't expecting that. I know. She says Christmas is already planned. I'm not changing her plans. No. He sighed quietly. I suppose you aren't. I waited. It sounded like he wanted to say something else. Several times he started a sentence before stopping. Finally he whispered, Be careful. The words caught me off guard. Careful of what? He didn't answer. Instead he said, Merry Christmas, Bella. Not Isabella. Bella. He hadn't called me that since I was a teenager. Then the line went dead. That night I stood alone in my apartment after everything had been prepared. The food was ready. The tables were set. Snow drifted quietly outside the windows. The lights on the tree reflected against the glass, making the room feel twice as warm. I realized something then. Tomorrow wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about refusing to spend another holiday waiting for people to choose me. I had chosen myself. I had built a place where no one would have to wonder if they belonged. If my parents came, they would be welcomed. If they stayed away, the room would still be full. Either way, they no longer controlled whether Christmas happened. As I switched off the kitchen light and headed toward bed, my phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from Cousin Megan. "Just so you know, several people changed their plans tonight." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Three dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her reply came. "Let's just say, not everyone appreciated finding out you were never invited in the first place." I stared at the screen. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, the house I'd spent years wishing my parents would make feel like home finally did. Tomorrow would bring answers. Maybe not all of them, but enough. Enough to ensure that, after this Christmas, my family would never be able to pretend the past had happened the way they claimed. I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot what day it was. Then I saw the glow of the Christmas tree in the corner of my living room. Today. The day my parents had expected me to spend alone. Instead, the apartment already smelled like cinnamon rolls baking in the oven and coffee brewing in the kitchen. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stood by the window. Fresh snow covered the sidewalks. The world looked peaceful, almost innocent. It was strange how life could look so beautiful on the same morning your heart felt like it was standing on the edge of a cliff. At 9 o'clock, the first knock came. Mrs. Alvarez stood there holding a steaming casserole. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." I smiled. "Merry Christmas." Then came Mr. Dawson with folding chairs, my friend Hannah carrying homemade cookies, an old co-worker with 2 bottles of sparkling cider, my college roommate Emily, who hugged me before she even took off her coat. Within an hour, the apartment was full of conversation. People who had never met one another were introducing themselves. Someone started helping in the kitchen without being asked. Children from down the hall were decorating gingerbread cookies at the dining table. Laughter echoed through every room. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And somehow, that made it perfect enough. I looked around and realized something I hadn't expected. Nobody cared whether the napkins matched. Nobody noticed that 2 different sets of dinner plates were on the table. Nobody was performing. They were simply enjoying each other's company. For years, I'd mistaken perfection for love. Now I understood that love rarely looked perfect. It looked comfortable. Just after noon, another knock came. This one was quieter, more hesitant. When I opened the door, I found Megan. Behind her stood Aunt Carol, and behind them, several cousins. "We hope we're not too late," Megan said. I stepped aside without hesitation. "You're exactly on time." As coats were hung and greetings exchanged, the apartment somehow became even warmer. No one asked permission to belong. They simply joined in. It felt effortless. The kind of effortless I'd spent years chasing inside my own family. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Heard you've got half the family over there." I looked around the room. Someone had started a card game. Mrs. Alvarez was teaching one of the children an old family recipe. Emily was laughing so hard she nearly dropped a serving spoon. I typed a simple reply. Everyone was welcome. He read it almost immediately. No response came. An hour later, there was another knock. This time, the apartment fell unusually quiet. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, my parents stood together in the hallway. Dad looked exhausted. Mom looked composed. Too composed. She smiled the way people smile before delivering bad news. "I see you've been busy." "I have." She glanced past me into the apartment. "You invited everyone." "I invited anyone who wanted somewhere to celebrate." Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've created quite a bit of confusion." "I didn't realize kindness was confusing." Dad looked down. Mom ignored the remark. "We'd like to come in." For a long moment, I considered saying no. It would have been easy. It would also have made me exactly the person they'd always claimed I was. So I stepped aside. Of course. The room quieted as they entered. Conversations slowed. People noticed. Not because anyone expected a fight, because everyone knew something important was about to happen. Mom looked around the apartment. She saw cousins who had left her gathering early. She saw friends she'd never met. She saw neighbors laughing together. She saw a room full of people who had chosen to be there. For the first time in my memory, she wasn't the person hosting Christmas, and it unsettled her. I didn't realize so many people had changed their plans. Megan answered before I could. Most of us didn't know Bella wasn't invited. Silence. Mom looked at her. There must have been a misunderstanding. There wasn't, I said quietly. You told me there wasn't room. You told everyone else I chose not to come. Nobody spoke. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in the room. Mom's smile faltered. I didn't want anyone feeling uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable. I was protecting the holiday. No. My voice stayed calm. You were protecting the story. She blinked. What story? The one where I'm always the difficult daughter. Across the room, Dad closed his eyes. Just for a second. Long enough for me to notice. Long enough to remember Grandma's letter. Begin with your father. I turned toward him. Dad? He slowly looked up. I need you to answer one question. His shoulders stiffened. Is there something about my life that everyone else knows except me? The room became perfectly still. Mom answered first. Isabella, this isn't the time. I didn't ask you. She took a step forward. I said this isn't the... I asked Dad. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dad did something I had never seen him do. He ignored Mom. He looked directly at me. His eyes were wet. I should have told you years ago. Mom's face lost its color. Richard. He didn't even turn toward her. I can't keep asking her to live inside a lie. The words seemed to echo through the apartment. No one interrupted. No one breathed. Dad swallowed hard. When you were little, his voice cracked. Your grandmother begged us to tell you the truth. I felt my heart beat in my throat. The truth about what? He closed his eyes. When you were 3 months old. Another pause. We adopted you. No sound came out of me. Not immediately. The room disappeared. Not literally, just emotionally. Everything became distant. Muted. Like hearing the world from underwater. Dad continued. Your birth mother was your mother's cousin. Mom whispered. Richard, stop. He shook his head. No. You promised. I know. He looked back at me. We were afraid. Afraid of what? That if you knew... His voice broke again. You'd stop loving us? I stared at them. 32 years. Every birthday, every holiday, every awkward silence, every unexplained distance, every moment I'd wondered why I never quite fit. None of it suddenly made sense, but it finally had context. I wasn't imagining the feeling that something had always been missing. I had simply never known why. I looked at Mom. Did you love me? She answered immediately. Of course. Then why spend my entire life making me earn it? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For perhaps the first time in her life. She had no explanation. No one applauded. No one cheered. Real life doesn't work that way. People quietly gave us space. Someone led the children into another room. Conversations resumed in whispers. Christmas continued. Just more gently. I walked to the window and stood there for several minutes. Snow was still falling. Exactly as it had that morning. Exactly as it had the day before. The world hadn't changed. I had. Eventually, Aunt Carol came to stand beside me. She didn't say, I told you. She didn't offer advice. She simply took my hand. Sometimes that's enough. My parents left before sunset. Dad hugged me tightly. I'm sorry. I know. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Just acknowledgement. Mom paused at the doorway. I hope one day you'll understand. I looked around the apartment, at friends washing dishes together, at neighbors laughing over board games, at cousins exchanging phone numbers with people they'd only met hours earlier. Then I looked back at her. I understand more today than I ever have. She waited. I understand that family isn't defined by who keeps your secrets. I smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. It's defined by who makes you feel welcome when the truth finally comes out. She lowered her eyes. For the first time, she had nothing left to say. After the door closed, I returned to the dining room. Someone handed me a warm mug of cocoa. Emily slid over to make room beside her. Mrs. Alvarez insisted I take the first slice of pie. The room was noisy again. Comfortably noisy. I realized then that the greatest revenge I'd ever achieved wasn't humiliating anyone. It wasn't exposing a secret. It was refusing to let years of exclusion convince me I was unworthy of belonging. My parents had expected me to spend Christmas alone. Instead, my home became the place everyone remembered. Not because of the secret that was revealed, but because, for one unforgettable day, every person who walked through my front door knew exactly how it felt to be genuinely welcomed. And that was the Christmas I finally stopped chasing a place at someone else's table. I built my own. People often assume that when a family secret comes out, everything changes overnight. It doesn't. Real life is quieter than that. The days after Christmas were filled with long silences instead of dramatic confrontations. Some relatives called to apologize, not because they had deliberately excluded me, but because they realized how often they had accepted someone else's version of events without ever asking for mine. Megan and I grew closer than we had been in years. Aunt Carol became someone I spoke with almost every week. For the first time, I felt like I had family members who knew the real me instead of the role I'd been expected to play. Dad kept his promise to stop hiding. A few weeks after Christmas, he came to my apartment alone. We talked for hours. He answered every question I asked, even the painful ones. Some answers brought comfort, others raised new questions. But honesty, even when it hurts, is easier to live with than uncertainty. My relationship with Mom was different. There wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There wasn't a final argument either. Just distance. I think she genuinely believed that keeping the truth hidden had protected our family. Maybe, in her own way, she thought she was protecting me too. But love built on secrecy always asks someone else to carry the weight. For 32 years, that someone was me. Eventually, I learned a truth that had nothing to do with adoption. Belonging isn't something another person grants you. It isn't a seat at someone else's table. It isn't an invitation that can be taken away with a phone call. Belonging begins the moment you stop measuring your worth by the people who refuse to see it. The following Christmas, I hosted another gathering. Not out of spite. Not to prove a point. Because it had become a tradition. Neighbors came. Friends came. Some relatives came. A few new faces joined us too. The table was even bigger. The decorations still didn't match. Someone still burned the dinner rolls. We laughed about it anyway, and as I looked around the room, I realized something that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I wasn't wondering whether I belonged. I already knew I did. The greatest revenge wasn't exposing a secret. It wasn't watching anyone feel embarrassed. It was building a life so full of genuine love, honesty, and acceptance that the people who had once made me feel invisible no longer had the power to define who I was. That Christmas, I lost the family story I'd spent years trying to fit into. In its place, I found my own. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. What would you have done if your own family told you that you weren't invited to Christmas? Would you have confronted them, walked away, or done what Isabella did and built a place where everyone truly belonged? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more original revenge and justice stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for spending your time with me, and until next time, remember, sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't taking someone's place, it's creating a better one of your own.